that's legitimate UI. This one looks like it's not legitimate existential instantiation because that's not the main connective. This one is legitimate universal instantiation because that's the main connective.
So we can only apply the rule for one quantifier, which is the
Main. Right. Okay, any more questions about that homework? What's that? Number 3. Did you have a different one? Because some of them were randomly generated.
Yeah, right. Some students pass if and only if all professors credit.
Yeah, I don't have that one. Okay, do you have a printout of it? Oh, there we are. Yes. Some students pass. So the main connective is the biconditional. So what comes first is some students pass. That would be, that would look like this. So it could be this one, this one, this one, or this one. It's not either of these two because this one isn't a biconditional. All professors curve. For everything in the universe, if it's a professor, then it curves. This one is wrong because the biconditional is not the main connective here. Here the quantifier is the main connective, but the biconditional has to be the main connective. So it could be this one. Also, I changed that to an R. Yeah, it's this one.
because the biconditional is supposed to be.
Right. So it's some students pass is the one on the left. If and only if all professors curve. So it's two categorical propositions and an if and only if.
Wouldn't it be why isn't it the third one?
It's the only thing. Because you have to change the predicate for pass.
Oh, you're right. Yes, because the trouble here is this one. See, this is why I'm glad I don't have to take the homework. Because that's right. This is pass, and this is professors, and you can't use the same predicate. So you have to use a different method there. Well spotted. Okay, 3 things I want to do today. 1, work through this worksheet. If you have not picked up a copy of this, come and get it. When we've done that, I will say a little bit about the final. You are scheduled to take the final on Monday at 10:30. What's that? The 15th, yes. Yes, that's right. I'm giving exactly the same final to my other class at 7:45 2 days later. If you don't have a class if you do have a class before this one, then your final for that class will be scheduled in that time slot. If you don't have a class before, if this is your first class of the day, in other words, then there will be no conflict if you wanted to get up at 7:45 to take your final. You're welcome to come on Wednesday instead of Monday if you want to. You should probably let me know, though. That's one thing. I will say a lot more about the final, but you will need a Scantron, just like the midterm. So don't forget to bring a Scantron. Yes?
What time did you say it was?
Which one?
That's on
The one that you're actually scheduled to take is, that's at 10:30 on Monday. Here, of course. One other piece of business. Practically nobody has done the evaluations for the class. If you didn't like the class, I don't mind if you don't do the evaluations. But if you love the class, you should really do the evaluations. Either way, if you want to do them, you should do them soon because then they take them offline fairly shortly. It used to be that they handed out evaluations in class and everybody did them. Now they put them online and nobody can be bothered. That's the way. That's the way it goes.
Professors say if like 70 or 80% of the class do the evaluation, they will give extra credit.
They will
So-
give extra credit. Well, that is totally bogus. I'm not going to do that. Extra credit. I don't even know what those words mean. What's the other thing I want to say? Oh yeah, remember also that we've been videoing every one of these classes. They're all on YouTube. So if there's something that you forgot or a class that you missed, you can go back and subject yourself to 1.25 hours of bad video if you want to go over stuff. Yeah?
Will the final be cumulative, or will it just be like
It will not be cumulative. It will be, obviously there's some things that have been relevant throughout the entire class, but you won't be doing any Venn diagrams or any of that stuff. I will tell you exactly what you will be doing when we get to that point, which will be after we do this worksheet. So let's do this worksheet. I want to do this worksheet just because it brings together both symbolizing and doing proof. It's like all of the good stuff combined. It's like it all comes together and meshes. So I kind of like to do it at the end just as an illustration of how all of this stuff works together. Okay, so let's look at this sheet. Now, as it says, this is a version of a well-known argument from philosophy of religion. I tend to use arguments from philosophy of religion, like for example when I was introducing proofs, I gave another argument from philosophy of religion. They tend to be, they tend to lend themselves to symbolization. I don't know if that's because medieval monks did two things: argue about God and work on logic, so the two things go together well. But anyway, also I teach philosophy of religion fairly commonly, and I'm just familiar with the arguments. So it is an actual argument, and it is of interest. Like most intriguing arguments, it is an argument with premises that just about anybody could agree with, but a controversial conclusion. So it's worth testing to see whether or not it's a valid argument. So the first premise is basically a definition of omnipotence. There we go. It says anything that is omnipotent can do all actions. Basically, anything omnipotent can do anything. The second one is all sins are actions. Now, you'd have to have kind of a loose definition of actions, because there are such things as sins of omission, which is basically where you're bad for doing nothing, as in the last ever episode of Seinfeld, where they don't help a guy on the other side of the road. In fact, they laugh at him. But I think in general that's fairly non-controversial. God can do no sin, because God is perfect, God can't sin. Sins exist. I had to add this one. I symbolized this, and then I tried to do the proof and realized that it wouldn't work without this. And it wouldn't work without this because these are all, take one of those, Jake. These are all universal claims, and the conclusion is specific. So if you remember when we were doing categorical syllogisms, and we talked about how in modern logic there's an extra rule of validity. That is, you cannot have the premises be universal and the conclusion be particular. That's what I was doing here. If I just had these premises that are all universal claims, they don't have existential import, but the conclusion does. So I had to add this extra one, which is an existential claim. Sins exist. Seems pretty obvious, but you have to state it. Okay, so all of these seem pretty self-evidently, seem pretty non-controversial. Most people could agree with those. But the conclusion is God is not omnipotent, which is fairly controversial, because God being omnipotent is one of the usually accepted claims of the major world religions. Alright, so let's see if we can first of all symbolize all of the premises and the conclusion, and then we'll try and prove it. First, try and symbolize it. I've given you the predicates. O is a one-place predicate, meaning blank is omnipotent. A is a one-place predicate, meaning blank is an action. S is a one-place predicate, meaning blank is a sin. D is a two-place predicate, meaning blank can do blank. You also need the name G. What will the name G refer to? God, because God is mentioned in the conclusion. So see if you can symbolize those, first of all. Can you guys at the back see, or do you need the lights back on? You're okay? You can always... Your phone probably has an app you can use as a lamp. Yes?
Yeah, I'll just go fast.
Secret stuff.
So, you know about the superpower thing that's federal?
No, I don't know about that.
That's basically an 8 to 5 walk-in tutoring.
And you're going to be part of it?
Yeah, so basically they have these flyers open for pavilion.
Okay.
I could, there would be like a graph and a poem. Along
Sure.
with IMS surveys.
Yes, that's right. Oh, I should have had those for the other class.
Yeah, well, you may know that's
Okay.
I'm pretty good, so it's my bad, but do you mind if I repeat?
No, go do that. Can you turn that off? How do you... Yeah, stop it for now.
Okay.
Okay, let's have a look at this. I'm going to skip over the first premise because that's the most complicated one. Done. Number 2, all sins are actions. Symbolize for me, please.
For any x,
So universal quantifier.
for x, if x is a sin, if Sx,
Yep.
then Ax,
Then
something is an action.
there you go. For everything in the universe, if it's a sin, then it's an action. Ethan, God can do no sin. Now, first of all, notice that I have bolded the quantity word. So what type is that?
E,
It's an E type. Okay, so symbolize away.
universal x. If x is a sin, so that's x, then tilde.
Yeah, because this is an E type, you know that there's going to be a conditional and a tilde right next to each other.
Then d, gx.
Then it is not the case that God can do it. So for everything in the universe, if it's a sin, then it is not the case that God can do it. Okay, sins exist, Josh. Not that you would know anything about such things.
Existential quantifier. SX.
That's right. That's not even a categorical proposition because there's only one predicate. Finally, Karen, we're going to put you at risk of the lightning bolt. Can you symbolize God is not omnipotent? What quantifier are you going to need?
Universal.
No,
Okay. Existential.
No. it was a trick question. You're not going to need a quantifier. Why not? Because it's using a name. So no quantifiers. What predicate are you going to need?
I'm gonna need O.
You are.
It's
Oh, I should do it in red because it's the conclusion.
just gonna be tilde O little g.
That's right. OG for original gangster. That is correct. Not tilde OG. Okay, Cat, you're in luck. You get the difficult one. Now, this is this is going to need 2 quantifiers. So it's going to be, we're going to do it like we did before with the nested quantifiers. But the first one is anything. So what type of categorical syllogism is that?
Universal.
Yeah, it's an A type. So it's going to look like this. Universal, and then conditional, and then it's going to look like that essentially. Now, anything what? So you specify what the thing is that you're talking about here. It's anything that,
Omnipotent.
so how are we going to say that?
Big O, little x.
Yes. And so anything that is omnipotent can do all actions. So how do you say X can do something? That's what we'll say here.
PXY.
Yes, and obviously we're going to need y to refer to all actions because it's a quantity of things. Okay, so this is the main categorical syllogism. But there's also another categorical syllogism because of this second quantity word. Now, because that's an all, what type is this categorical proposition? It's A, E, I, or O. It's another A type. So, quantifier. What type of quantifier?
Universal.
What variable?
Y.
Y. Okay, so we're gonna have Y, and then there's gonna be a conditional. What is Y?
Reaction of A, big A of Y.
That's right. So for everything in the universe, if it's omnipotent, then for all things that are actions, the omnipotent thing can do the action. There you go. All right. We have symbolized the argument. Now, we're going to try and prove it. Jake, start us off. We have four premises. Now, four premises, can we instantiate all of them? Is there any of these premises that we can't instantiate? No, we can instantiate all of them. Now, there is one quantifier that we can't instantiate, which is that.
Universal Y.
What's that?
The universal Y.
Yes, we can't instantiate this one because it's not the main connective. But we can instantiate this one because it has the whole line in its scope. We can instantiate this one, we can instantiate this one, we can instantiate this one. So, now, as I've said, the normal way that you do proofs in predicate logic is you instantiate everything, do the proof, and then generalize to get the quantifier back at the end. Of course, we're not going to have to do the generalizing at the end because there isn't a quantifier in the conclusion. So that's one difference. All right, so we're going to instantiate. Which one? Can we just pick whichever one we want to start with, or is there one we should instantiate first? The existential, said Jake in a funny voice. Yes, the existential. Why?
So we start with the existential like that.
That's right, you do always start with the existential. Why?
Existential instantiation has a rule that universal instantiation doesn't.
Exactly. Existential has this extra restriction that you can't match the name that you've already used, but we are going to want to match the name, so we get the existential first. All right, so we're going to do existential instantiation line 4. What's that going to give us, Jake? S and a name. Pick a name.
Just
Don't overthink this.
SG.
No, it wouldn't be G. If it was SG, what would that be saying in English? God is a sin.
Oh no.
You would be
okay.
blaspheming. What?
I'm not very religious though.
So you wouldn't have a problem with that. Let's say SA, because we're unimaginative. And I'm going to tell you what A is. A is a specific instance of lying to your granny. That's definitely a sin. Okay. So what this says in English is, lying to your granny is a sin. That's another thing we're going to do. Because we know what each of these predicates stand for, we're going to know what each of the lines means in English. This first one means lying to your granny is a sin. Zainab, what next?
Sites. If it's A, then A. Capital A, small a.
Um,
Universal is the instantiation.
Good. What? Line 2. All right. Now, what does that mean in English?
Flying to your
If-
granny is a sin.
Yeah. If lying to your granny is a sin, then
The lying to your granny is an action.
yes, true. A bit boring, but there you go. All right. What should we do next, Brent? Well, we're going to have to instantiate all the lines eventually. There is actually something we can already do with lines 5 and 6 if we wanted. Or we can just instantiate, it doesn't really matter. What is it that we can do with lines 5 and 6? If you look at, think of line 6 first and then line 5. What inference form does that suggest to you? Modus ponens. So modus ponens 6, 5 will give us what?
Capital A.
Yes, which means what? Is an
Action.
yes, line to grammar is an action. An odd thing to say, but true nonetheless. All right. Hunter.
SA and not DGA.
How'd you get that?
Existential. Let's see.
No, not existential.
Oh, universal.
So universal instantiation. What line? 3. What does that mean in English? See, this is why you should cut down on the smoking, Jake.
Lying to your grandma is a sin. Yeah, it's a sin then. Lying to your grandma.
If lying to your grandma is a sin, then God can't do it. Something your gran will be pleased to know. God can't lie to her. All right. What next? Jordan.
Capital O.
No.
No.
You want, so what you're doing is, you're doing the right thing. You're doing universal instantiation of line 1, right?
Yes.
Now, you picked the name A.
Oh.
What name would be a better choice? What's that?
B.
No, not B, because remember, it's universal instantiation, so you can pick any name you like. You don't have to do a new one. But you said O, A. Lying to your grandmother is omnipotent. What do you want? What? Look at the conclusion.
Yeah. But jeez. Can you just go into that?
Of course, yeah, because it's universal instantiation. You can use a name that occurs before in universal instantiation.
Then G.
Keep going.
Then Y. Capital A. Y. Then capital G. G. Y.
Yes, and notice that you've got the G in the right place there too, so that's going to be good. So, oh, and close parentheses. What does that mean in English? If
God is omnipotent,
Then?
something is an action.
then God can do all actions. That makes sense? If God is omnipotent, then God can do all actions. Because remember, the original meant anything that is omnipotent can do all actions, and we've just replaced the anything with God. So if God is omnipotent, then God can do all actions. Yeah? Why are you looking so puzzled
I'm
and
so confused about all
troubled?
of this.
Well, but what gave us the clue that we needed to use G there? That it's in the conclusion. We're going to want to get OG in the conclusion. So we have to get that somewhere, and this is the only occurrence of O in the premises. So we're going to want to stick G onto it. Otherwise we're not going to be able to get it in the conclusion. And besides, who better to be omnipotent than God? All right. Now, there is one more easy thing, or relatively easy thing we can do. Samantha?
Modus ponens, 7 and 5.
Modus ponens, what was that again?
7 and 5.
7 and 5.
Oops, on my paper it's 8 and 5.
Yes, 8 and 5. Which gives us what?
It would be tilde, B, little d, and then 8.
What does that mean?
That you have to
God can't, lying to your granny is something God cannot do. Yes. Now, we've done the easy stuff. Now we have to do a little bit of lateral thinking. Remember that I said way back when we were doing proofs to begin with, there are essentially two approaches. There's the bottom, and I'm not talking about, conditional proof or reductio ad absurdum. I mean, in general, doing proofs in general. There's the bottom-up method where you just mess around and see what you can do. Essentially, that's what we've been doing. With the one exception is when we had to plan ahead to know that we wanted G there. Otherwise, we've just been doing whatever we can do. We've just been instantiating or doing modus ponens when it jumped out at us. But now we have to sit back and think, okay, we're trying to get this. What line are we going to use to get that? What's that? 9. Because that's the only place where it shows up. Now, we want to get the negation of OG, and OG is the antecedent of a conditional here. So what inference form are we going to use to get it? Modus tollens, right? Because modus tollens gives us as a conclusion the negation of the antecedent of a conditional. Modus tollens looks like this. If you have if square, then triangle, not triangle, conclusion, not square. In other words, we end up with the negation of the antecedent, which is what we want to do. So, to be able to do modus tollens, what are we going to need? We're going to need not triangle. In other words, the negation of the consequent. So we're going to need this with a negation in front of it. We're going to need not y, ay, then dgy. Now that looks like it's going to be a royal pain in the ass to get. But actually, it's not going to be that tricky. What is our first step to getting that?
Conjunction.
Conjunction. Very good. Of what two lines? 7 and 10, which gives us AA and not DGA. Which means lying to your gran is an action and God can't do it. Somebody who hasn't said anything yet. What was that?
Implication.
Brian, yes, implication. Now implication, that is my favorite. Implication always involves a conditional, because we're not starting with a conditional, we're going to end up with a conditional. So, there are 3 stages when it involves and conditional. First stage, replace the and with a conditional. Second stage, negate this one, so instead of not DGA, it's going to be just DGA. We don't do anything to the antecedent, but the third stage is negate the whole thing. So that's what implication is going to give us. We're pretty close to getting this. In fact, how close? Here's a question for you. Can we just go straight from this to this by universal generalization? Answer yes or no? No. For 2 reasons. First reason, what is the only name you're allowed to do universal generalization to?
U.
U. Is this U? No, it's A. And notice that it was introduced by existential instantiation. So there's no way it could have been U, because you can't introduce U by universal instantiation. That's the one reason why we can't do universal generalization. But even if this was U, you couldn't get this by universal generalization. Why not? Because what has to be the main connective when you've done universal generalization? What has to end up as the main connective? The quantifier. What is the main connective here? The tilde. So you couldn't end up with, if you do generalization, you have to end up with something where the quantifier is on the left. Here the tilde is on the left. So we're going to do this in 2 steps. What is the first step? Existential generalization. Good. To line 12. First of all, though, what does line 12 mean? Who wants to say what it is in English?
It's not the case that applying to a grant is an action, then God can lie to a grant.
Yes. It is not the case that if lying to a granny is an action, then God can do it. All right, what is existential generalization going to give me? Well, first of all, because it's generalization, it's going to end up with the existential quantifier. Oh, I've done something wrong already. What have I done wrong?
So
I want y, because I'm trying to convert it into this. So I don't want x, I want y. And then we have the tilde immediately after it. And then we go through this and replace all the a's with y's. So we get a, y, then d, g, y. This means there is something such that it is not the case that if it's an action, then God can do it. Okay? And that's line 13, not 12. Okay, not 12-2. Somebody who has not said anything yet. How about you, Destiny? If you said something, you said it too quietly. What is my next step? I'll give you a hint. We're trying to get this. We have this. What is the step? Quantify negation. Magic hopping tilde. The tilde hops over the quantifier, sprinkles the magic pixie dust, and it changes. And then we have what we wanted. What does this mean? It is not the case that yes, it is not the case. Well, it's not the case that God can do all actions. Yes, it is not the case that God can do all actions. But if it's not the case that God can do all actions, what does that mean? God is not omnipotent. And how do we get that? Modus tollens. What two lines? 9 and 14. There you go. I gave you an argument in English, we symbolized it, and we proved it. All right. Now, if you're a little worried about this, don't worry. This is a well-known argument in philosophy of religion. What we've shown is that this argument is valid. And it's a valid argument with the conclusion that God is not omnipotent. Does that mean we have to accept that God is not omnipotent? No. But if we want to reject the conclusion, if we want to say the conclusion is false, what will that mean?
We have to reject at least one premise.
Right. What is impossible is for all the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false, given that this is valid. But what's perfectly possible is for the conclusion to be false and at least one of the premises to be false. That can happen all the time. So if you're we proved that this is a valid argument. If you want to reject the conclusion, you have to reject one of the premises. And that's where people usually go. This is a bad one to reject. I think most people would... you could deny this, but the kind of people who would deny this would be atheists anyway. They would say, I don't believe in sin. God can do no sin. Some people say, well, it's not the case that God can't do sins, it's just the case that he doesn't. A lot of people want to say that, but that's kind of tricky because if God is perfect, then it's not really possible for him to do sin. So that one, some people reject that one. All sins are actions. You could say that there are sins of omission, but that's not really an interesting one. That's kind of equivalent. This is usually the one that people target. What they say is that actually omnipotent, you can be omnipotent and not be able to do some things. Now that seems a little weird, but the classic example is making a rock so heavy. Can God make a rock so heavy that he can't lift it? You know, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if he can make the rock, there's something he can't do, which is what?
Lift it.
Lift it. And if he can't make the rock, well, obviously there's something he can't do, which is make the rock. Some people say, well, he can do anything, so he can make the rock that he can't lift and then lift it.
Can you make a habanero to be spicy for him?
Yeah, so microwave a burrito so hot that he can't eat it, yeah. There's all sorts. But anyway, I just wanted to show that we can put it all together. We're putting the symbolization and the proof together in one delicious package. There you go. Now, let's talk a little bit. Can you turn the lights on here?
Can I have these out real quick?
Oh, sure, yes, yes. In fact, take a moment to do what you wanted to, what you wanted to do.
Alright, thanks. These are basically just surveys and flyers for Tutorama this Friday, 8 to 5. It's basically just walk-in tutoring at the Student Success Center, 285 in the building. I'll be there, so if you want to go over anything for the final stuff.
Eventually meet up one-on-one.
All right. Now, you can fill out those surveys in a little bit, but, well, you can start filling them out now. But I'm going to talk about the final. The final is going to look like this. In other words, it's going to be printed on paper. This is an old final, so the questions are going to be different, but the basic breakdown is going to be the same. Look how many sheets there are. Oh, it's going to be awful. The most important thing to note is it's broken into two sections. Just like the midterm. Just like the midterm was broken into two sections. And just like the midterm, the first section is you're going to answer it on the paper, and the second section you're going to answer on a Scantron sheet. So remember to bring a Scantron sheet. I mean, this time you're going to use all 50 questions on the Scantron sheet. But it's not as bad as it sounds. We'll get to that in a second. It's out of about 130. Yeah. 80 points are on the right-on sheet. The first two questions, worth 10 points each, are shortcut method tests for validity. Who would like me to go over the shortcut method test for validity? Yes, because it was a while ago, and actually I did it when I was in Yorkshire. Let's do question 10 on page 370. Question 10 on page 370 looks like this. Well, yeah, looks like actually no. Oh. All right. So the argument is two premises, if J then K and if L then M, premise 1. You put that in its own box. Premise 2 is not K or not M. You put that in its own box. And then conclusion is not J or not L. You should be able to tell whether or not this is valid. You should recognize this.
What page is this?
This is page 370. Question 10. Do you recognize this? Josh, did you nod your head?
Yeah.
What is it? There's a name for what this is, and it is?
Destructive dilemma.
Destructive dilemma. So therefore we know that this is valid. Okay, but let's prove it. Now remember, the shortcut method test for validity is actually a test for invalidity, really, because you're trying to do something, and if you succeed in doing that thing, you will have proved that the argument is invalid. It's only if you fail to do that thing that you will have shown that it's valid. What is that thing? The conclusion is
False.
the conclusion is false, and
The premises are true.
right. So you're trying to make the conclusion false at the same time that you make the premises true. Now, usually you start by making the conclusion false. The only time you wouldn't start with that is if you had something like this. Why wouldn't you start with making the conclusion false if it was something like this?
There are multiple ways to make it false.
Right, because that's a conjunction, and that can be false 3 ways. You could start with that, but then you would have to do 3 lines. You would have to do a line where the first one is true and the second one is false, then a line when they were false true, and then a line when they were both false, to cover all possibilities. We want to be lazy. We want to only stick to 1 line if possible. Well, thankfully, there's only one way for this conclusion to be false, which is if what? What's that? both disjuncts are false, in other words, if both J and L are true, because we want not J to be false, so J is true, and not L to be false, so L is true. Immediately I've done that, what do I do?
J and
What's that?
J and L and every premise.
Yes, so find out where they occur in the premises and fill in the truth values we've just entered. So if J is true in the conclusion, it is also true over here. And if L is true in the conclusion, it's also true over here. All right, now we go on to the premises. Which premise do I start with? Do I start with this one, number 1, or number 2? Why not start with number 2? It looks simpler. Why not start with that one? Why not? What are we trying to do to the premises? We try and make the conclusion false. We try and make the premises. What's the problem with this?
Can be true more than once.
There's 3 ways for a disjunction to be true. So again, I would have to add lines if I started with this one. Now let's hope there's only one way for this to be true. Actually, there is only one way for this to be true. First of all, it's a conjunction, which means the only way for it to be true is if both conjuncts are true. And that means K and M must be what?
True.
Why?
Because if the consequence is false, then the condition is false.
Exactly, because there's only one way for a conditional to be false, which is if the antecedent is true, which it is already, and the consequent is false. But if we want it to be true, then K cannot be false, it must be true, M must be true. What do I do immediately now? Right, transfer the truth values we've just worked out for K and M, which makes not K false and not M false, which makes this disjunction false. I have finished filling out my table. What has it shown?
It's invalid.
That the argument is valid. Why? So I write valid and I do one more thing. What is the one more thing?
An arrow go.
I draw an arrow to the part of the table that proves this. What is the part of the table that proves that it's valid? Where I failed to make the premises true. So it's right there. Okay, you remember that? All right, let's change this a little. I'm getting messy, but I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to change this to an and. So it's not J and not L. Everything else is the same. Now, why is that a pain in the ass? Yes, there's more than one way for that to be false. So I'm going to have to do extra lines because there's more than one way for this to be true, there's more than one way for this to be true, there's more than one way for this to be false. There's nowhere I can start where it can only be the truth value I want one way. All of the truth values I want, there's multiple possibilities. So I have to say 3 possibilities. False, not J is false, not L is true, not J is true but not L is false, or they're both false. Those are the 3 ways that this conjunction can be false. Everybody see that? Now, oh, that's wrong.
For the first one,
Yes?
it can be both false.
Yes, that's what I've got here. So there are 3 ways for this to be false. If one of them is false, either not J or not L, or if they're both false. So the third one is where they're both false. Okay? Yes? So I've covered the 3 ways for this to be false. The only way for this to be true is if they're both true. So that's the line I've missed out, because I want where they're false. Alright. Now, if I do the first line and it turns out it looks like it's valid, have I proved that it's valid?
No.
No. I have to keep going through all the possibilities. However, if I do the first line and it shows that it's invalid, can I stop?
Yeah.
Yes. In other words, invalidity trumps everything. If you prove invalidity, you're done. If you prove validity, you're only done if there are no more possibilities. As in the previous case, there was only one way for this to be false. And once that was false, there was only one way for this to be true. And once that was true, this couldn't be true. So that was only one possibility, and I wasn't able to do it. So let's do this one. So once again, J is true. And we want this to be true. And both of them have to be true. Now, if L then M is already true, no matter what M is, why?
Because it has a false antecedent.
Because we know that from the truth table of conditionals, if the conditional has a false antecedent, then the whole thing is true. So I'm going to leave M blank, because it doesn't matter what it is. However, for this to be true, K has to be true. Can't be false. So we fill in K over here, and that makes K false. Well, if K is false, can we make this disjunction true? I'm sorry, if not K is false, can we make this whole disjunction true?
If not, M is false.
If, you mean if not M is
True.
true. If not M is true, then the whole thing is true. So that makes M false. Do I have to go any further? Do I have to do the next two lines? What? No, I don't. Why not?
Do you have true premises? and
Because
false
I've
conclusions?
succeeded. I've shown that this is invalid. And if it's invalid on one line, then the argument is invalid. So I'm done. I don't have to do the other lines. But what I have to do is I have to write the word invalid. And then one other thing. I have to list the truth values for all of the letters that make all the premises true and the conclusion false. In this case, L and M are false, J and K are true. That's what you do if it's invalid. So if it's valid, you just draw an arrow to where the premise is false or the conclusion is true. If it's invalid, you have to list all of the truth values of the component letters. If you still want to go over that some more, remember the video I did in a church. No, it wasn't. Was that in the church? No, that was in my hotel room in Prague. It's still online. You can check that out. Apparently 11 people from the Philippines have checked it out. I don't know why. Maybe to take their minds off the devastation they're experiencing. All right. So that's worth 20 points out of the 130. 60 points are on proofs. Now, bad news and good news. And then we have the multiple choice. Bad news and good news. Here's the bad news. I'm not going to give you the rules. You have to know the rules. What rules am I talking about? The inference rules and the equivalence rules. Of course, my offer is still open. If you tattoo them on your flesh, that's allowed. You're allowed to bring them in. Otherwise, you're not allowed to bring them in. Has to be permanent, though. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. I sort of am going to give you the rules. And what's more, you're going to get points for them. In that, the first 19 questions on the multiple choice part of it are going to come in groups of 5, because there are only 5 possibilities on a Scantron. And I'm going to give you the name of 5 rules and an example of each, and you have to match them up. So I might say modus ponens, modus tollens, destructive dilemma, constructive dilemma, addition. And then you get an example of each, and you have to say which is which. So you've got all the names, and you've got an example of each. You just have to match them up. Okay? That's going to be like the first questions on the multiple choice. Then the next few questions, I'm going to, in all of those, well, at least in the vast majority of those, I'm just going to give you legitimate examples. However, for the instantiation ones, it's going to be like on your homework you've just done. So it'll be legitimate universal instantiation, illegitimate universal instantiation, legitimate existential instantiation, illegitimate, and then you have to match them up. All right? That's going to be some more multiple choice, and then the rest of the multiple choice is going to be also like the homework you've just done. I'm going to give you a sentence in English, and you're going to have to give the best you're going to have to choose from a set of options the best symbolization of it. Okay? That's going to be the multiple choice section. The bulk of your points, though, proofs. So, with that in mind, let's turn to the homework you're going to hand in today. Who has finished all the questions? Well, you're going to be bored because, practice some proofs or something. Or you might want to pay attention just to see if I say don't do this and you just did it. All right, for the rest of you, who wants me to say something about question 1? Question 1, all right. Question 1 is difficult. All right, I have said that. No, actually question 1 is not that difficult. What should I do first? Well, let me ask this question. Can I instantiate line 2?
No.
No, I cannot. Why can I not instantiate line 2? The quantifier is not the main connective. What is? The tilde. I can instantiate line 1. Should I instantiate line 1 first?
No.
No. Why? Because of what I'm going to do to line 2. If I do something to line 2, I can make a quantifier the main connective. What is the thing I can do to line 2?
Quantify negation.
Quantify negation. But what's that going to do besides move the tilde?
Make it an existential.
Make it an existential. So suppose I do that. Should I then instantiate line 1?
No.
No. I should instantiate the existential because that's the rule. You should always instantiate the existential first. All right. So quantify negation, then instantiate. Now, look at, am I going to need to use the name U? When do you need to use the name U? When you're planning to do what? Universally generalized. Oh look, in the conclusion there's a universal quantifier. Am I going to have to universally generalize?
Not necessarily.
No, I am not. Not necessarily. Necessarily not. Well, actually not. Why not? Why am I not going to need to do universal generalization?
Quantify negation to get there.
Right. In other words, this is equivalent to this. And I'm going to get that by existential generalization. And you can do existential generalization to any old name. So what that tells me is I'm going to want to get something like this. And then I'm going to do existential generalization to it, and then I'm going to do quantify negation, and then I'll have the conclusion. There are two ways to get that. Well, there's probably many ways, but probably the easier way is once you instantiate, so first of all, you change this into an existential, and then you instantiate, and you will have the negation of a conditional. Usually when you see something, the negation of a conditional, you should think my favorite rule of equivalence, which is what? Implication. And the negation of a conditional is equivalent to, so in other words, not if P then Q is equivalent to P and not Q. In other words, you change this to this, you negate this one, and you get rid of this by implication. Well, that's going to give you two things that you're going to need. That will end up with you getting this. Okay? Don't look like that, Karen. So you will have the negation of a condition that only it'll be not if AA then CA. And then you can do implication to it, and then you can it's going to help you with this. You will have not CA, and if you look at this and not CA, an inference form should occur. There is a quicker way of doing this, which doesn't involve you doing implication, but the implication route is easier. Okay, who wants me to talk about number 2? All right. With number 2, same deal. You are going to get this by existential generalization and quantify negation. A couple of things though. Can I instantiate line 2?
No.
No. Why not?
Tilde is the main.
The tilde is the main connector. So I'm going to have to do what first?
Quantify.
Quantify negation. That's going to give me a universal, which is good. Can I instantiate line 1? No, I cannot. Because the conditional is the main connector. I cannot instantiate either side of this, which is a bit of a pain in the ass. However, I'm going to want to get D, and D is over here. How am I going to get at it? Answer, using modus tollens. So this is a bit like what just happened in our omnipotence proof. I'm going to want to get the negation of this. In other words, I'm going to want to get this. Notice that this is equivalent to this. And to get this, I'm going to first need not F, U. Maybe I should have picked a name other than U, or at least a predicate other than F. I am going to need that so that I can turn it into that, so that I can turn it into that, so that I can do modus tollens. Think about what you're doing after you've done quantify negation. One last thing. The universal quantifier that you get, the universal quantified statement that you get when you do quantify negation, you can instantiate from more than once. You can instantiate from it with U. You can also instantiate from it with any other name. And if you haven't instantiated from it more than once, you might have made a mistake. I'll let that sink in for a bit, and then we'll move on to number 3.
So after we get this, we do the
After you get what? This?
fx.
Yeah, after you do get this, do that, modus tollens. Then you're going to have to do some quantified negation business, instantiation, messing around, and then you're going to end up with not dA. And then you're 2 steps away from this. Okay? Are you stuck? I mean, is there stuff that you can do right now? Or are you stuck? All right, well, let me hold on.
With this one, I'm not allowed to do this in the
Right. So if you do that, you're going to try and get some kind of contradiction. Well, if you get a contradiction, that's fine. You prove, then you're done. What are you universally generalizing?
Not at all.
No, you can't because that's A. So, but if you, that's fine if you do U, but you have, oh, that's right. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to reinstantiate from this with U. So do a U there.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I don't understand.
No, well, yes. No, you want it. Yes, that's true. Yes.
This steps will be okay.
I think so, yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yes.
that's like quantifier negation. Basically, what I implied then was like wherever the negation is, you can just like move it one.
Let's see. Well, you can do it this way. Yeah, that would be fine. Let's just see if you did it right. Okay, so quantifier negation extension to the nexus. Yeah, simple.
If you have like a negative existential, you switch it over.
Is that a U or an A?
Universal.
A. Remember, facility, you're going to need another line reference there. So DS 1110. Don't lose half a point. Okay, simple. Yeah, that's fine. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, you can't use, you just change this all to A's and you're okay. Because then you can edit. You're not going to need U in this one. Yeah, you can't do that. You can't existentially instantiate U. But you don't need U.
I was just asking, can I use a separation order from?
I have my cards.
That way, that was.
What's wrong? If we change this to A, I don't think there's... Right, so you can have the same name. What's wrong with having the same name, so long as the name is A all the time? Oh, I see, yes. I see what you're saying. You can't existentially instantiate. All right, whatever. Actually, if you're going to
Just pick a name.
it will make your proof a lot simpler. First of all, yeah, so do quantify negation, and yeah, do quantify negation, and then don't use U, because you're existentially you can't use U. And the other thing is, if you're going to do X, do come first, and your proof will be much shorter.
Existential is just the same thing, but what?
Brand. What is this, number 2? Okay, so. Oh, okay. Probably it's better to do stuff before you assume, but anyway, let's so quantify negation to universal instantiation. Yes, existential. Now, the tilde will be there, not outside the quantifier, it will be inside the quantifier. Whenever you do generalizations, the quantifier has to be on the left. So the tilde takes across the left. And then, so here's the problem. If it's on the left, you haven't got negation of that. You have to move it over there, and by moving it over there, we'll make it universal. So you're going to have to do universal generalization. So there's the universal, so that when you pass the quantifier, it becomes existential.
Otherwise, this is
So
really
these are going to have to be
easy
used, so that you can do universal generalization. So change those to use, universal generalization, and then quantify negation, and then you can do that. Then let's see what this is. Yeah, there's a mistake here. You're going to, because you need parentheses around here, and then you can't simplify, you're going to have to do De
I
Morgan's
did
law.
like a bunch of these practice.
And then you're going to have to do disjunctive syllogism to get that, not just simplification. But you're pretty close. All right, let's talk about number 3. Number 3 is actually probably the easiest. The only trick to number 3 is that it's unlike the normal method. Because as I said, the normal method is you instantiate to get rid of the quantifiers, you do the proof, and then you generalize to get them back. Well, you are going to generalize, but what's the difference? The difference is you cannot instantiate anything. Obviously, you can't instantiate this one because it doesn't have a quantifier. Why can't you instantiate either of these? Because the conditional is the main connector. So you can't instantiate. So instead, what you're going to do is the opposite. You're going to generalize. Because you notice that you have these, and you notice that G is the antecedent of this one, J is the antecedent of this one, so if you simplify and generalize, you can do modus ponens. And then you can instantiate, do conjunction, and generalize, and you're done. So that one's actually pretty easy. Number 4. There are 2 ways to do number 4. Well, there's always many ways to do number 4. I said you will probably need taught. You will only really need taught if you do it the way I did it, which is not assuming anything. Suppose you wanted to do this using conditional proof. What would you assume?
So
Specifically what?
The negation of the conclusion.
What's that?
The negation of the conclusion.
No, that would be if you're going to do reductio ad absurdum. But if you're going to do conditional proof, it would be, you would assume RU, and then you would try and get PU, and then you would have proved if RU then PU by conditional proof, and then what would you do to get the conclusion? Universal generalization, that would give you the conclusion. Now, if you're doing it the way I do, without assuming anything, the thing to note is, essentially, look at the conclusion. It's if R then P. Well, here you have if R then Q, and here you have if Q then P. So if you had this and you could instantiate RU then QU, and you could instantiate QU then PU, you could do what to get something close to this? Hypothetical syllogism. You've got if R then Q, if Q then P. Do hypothetical syllogism so that you have if RU then PU, and then you can do universal generalization. The trouble is, you have to do modus ponens first. So you have to get this. To do modus ponens to get this. The way you're going to get this is out of these two. Now, of course you instantiate first. And which one do you instantiate first, 2 or 3? 2. So that's going to give you PA or QA. And then you're going to instantiate the other one, and you've got QA then PA. You're going to try and get PA, because then you can do existential generalization and you've got this. Okay? Here's a hint. Remember I said that you would need to use taught. Well, PA is equivalent to this by taught. So if you get this, you can turn it into PA. How can you get this? Well, I will tell you, this is also equivalent to this. If not PA, then PA. And you can get this by hypothetical syllogism, by messing around with these. Yes, Destiny. You want me to look at it? Alright, Destiny first, then Brian. Okay. This one? Alright, so. Okay, so you assume R. Now remember, this has to be RU if you're going to do universal generalization. It looks like an A. Okay, so if you're saying implication 4. Now the trouble is, of course, you've got a problem. Because this is going to have to be U, but this can't be U, because you've introduced it by existential instantiation. So that's a problem there. However, you're going to, so in other words, you're going to have to do what I suggested to get, you're not going to be able to match the names. That's the problem. Because, like I said, with existential instantiation, you can't do U, but you have to have U if you're going to do universal generalization. Alright? I'm sorry to break it to you. I mean, that's, you would get some points for this because this is essentially good thinking, but